Kyle Busch, a name that defines speed, dominance, and pure racing aggression. But how does a man who was still winning races, still pushing machines to their limit, suddenly become the center of one of the most shocking moments NASCAR has ever faced? Just days ago, everything looked normal on the surface. Fans were watching him compete, teams were preparing for upcoming races, and nothing suggested what was about to happen next. And then, everything changed. So the real question is this: how does a racing legend simply disappear like that? Was it really just a sudden illness that nobody saw coming? Or is there something deeper that hasn't been fully explained yet? Because when someone like Kyle Busch, one of the toughest competitors in motorsport history, goes down this fast, fans don't just ask what happened, they start asking why it happened so suddenly. Kyle Busch is not just another NASCAR driver. He is one of the most dominant, aggressive, and unpredictable competitors the sport has ever seen. A two-time Cup Series champion, a multi-series record holder, and a driver who never backed down from a challenge. And the strange part is, just days before everything changed, nothing looked unusual from the outside. He was still active, still competing, still doing what he had done for over 2 decades, living inside the racing world at full intensity. Fans were watching him on track, teams were preparing strategies around him, and there was no public sign that anything was wrong. That's what makes this story so hard to process, because in motorsport, Kyle Busch was the definition of consistency and survival. He was the kind of driver who could crash, recover, and come back stronger. The kind of competitor who never looked like he was slowing down. So when news started breaking, the first reaction wasn't belief, it was confusion. How does someone like that go from being fully active in the sport to suddenly being at the center of a devastating situation no one saw coming? At that moment, the entire NASCAR world was still trying to understand one thing: what changed so fast? Just before everything turned into chaos, Kyle Busch was still doing what he had always done, racing at full intensity, competing at the highest level, and proving once again why he is considered one of the most relentless drivers in NASCAR history. In fact, only days before the shocking events, he had delivered performances that reminded everyone of his dominance. On track, there was no sign of decline, no visible warning that something was wrong behind the scenes. He was still fighting for positions, still pushing through races, still acting like the same fearless competitor fans had followed for years. And that's what makes this moment so unsettling in hindsight, because looking back now, those normal moments don't feel normal at all. He was seen smiling after races, answering questions from reporters, and doing what he always did, talking about performance, strategy, and the next challenge ahead. From the outside, everything looked stable. Even fans believed they were watching just another chapter of his long and successful career. But the truth is, those were the final moments of a story no one realized was ending. There was no warning siren, no dramatic signal, no obvious red flag that something was about to go wrong. Just a professional athlete doing his job at the highest level, completely unaware that time was running out faster than anyone could imagine. And that's what makes this story so powerful and so tragic. Because sometimes the last normal day is exactly what it looks like. Normal, until it suddenly isn't. And in Kyle Busch's case, those final performances on the track would later be remembered not for what they achieved, but for what they unknowingly marked. The quiet end of an era nobody saw coming. At first, nothing looked alarming from the outside. Kyle Busch was still competing, still showing up for races, and still performing at a level that made it seem like everything was under control. But looking back, there were subtle moments that now feel different, almost like quiet warning signs that no one fully understood at the time. In the days leading up to the tragedy, there were reports of him dealing with discomfort during racing sessions. Nothing that stopped him completely, but enough that, in hindsight, it raises questions. He pushed through it like he always did. That was his nature. He didn't back out easily. He didn't slow down unless he absolutely had to. And that's what makes this part of the story so difficult, because sometimes the strongest competitors ignore what their bodies are trying to tell them. There were moments where he didn't look completely at ease, small signs that could easily be dismissed in the fast-paced world of motorsport. Fatigue, strain, and the pressure of constant performance. But in racing, pain is often normal, so those signals didn't stand out at the time. He kept going, he kept racing, he kept pushing forward, but now those same moments are being re-examined through a very different lens. Was it just routine racing stress? Or were they early indicators of something far more serious developing beneath the surface? That question is what makes this part of the story so unsettling, because in hindsight, the warning signs were there. But like many tragic stories, they only became visible after it was already too late. Everything changed in a matter of moments. What was supposed to be a normal training or simulator session suddenly turned into a situation no one in the room could have prepared for. Kyle Busch, a man known for control, precision, and unmatched focus behind the wheel, reportedly began experiencing severe distress inside the facility. At first, it didn't seem real. People around him thought it might just be a temporary issue, something that would pass in seconds. But it didn't. Instead, things escalated fast. The situation shifted from routine to emergency in what felt like no time at all. According to reports linked to emergency response details, he began struggling significantly. Breathing issues became apparent, his condition worsened rapidly, and the environment that was once calm and controlled suddenly turned into panic. And that's the part that makes this moment so hard to process, because in motorsport, Kyle Busch was always the one in control. He was the driver, the decision maker, the one reacting to chaos at 200 miles per hour, not the one caught in it. But here, there was no race to finish, no steering wheel to grab, no final lap to push through, just confusion, shock, and urgency. Emergency help was called immediately, and the atmosphere reportedly shifted into full crisis mode. What started as an ordinary moment inside a professional setting quickly became a race against time. Except this time, the finish line wasn't victory, it was survival. And in those critical moments, everything that Kyle Busch was known for, his toughness, his resilience, his ability to push through anything, was no longer something he could control. From that point forward, nothing about the situation was normal anymore. From the moment emergency responders arrived, the situation was no longer just urgent. It had become critical. Kyle Busch was transported immediately for medical attention, and what followed was a rapid escalation that no one around him was fully prepared for. Inside the hospital, doctors worked quickly, trying to stabilize his condition as the situation became increasingly serious with every passing moment. At first, there was still hope. That early belief that maybe, just maybe, things could be controlled. But that hope began to fade as medical teams realized how severe the situation had become. The condition wasn't improving at the pace anyone wanted. Instead, it was getting worse, fast. Behind the scenes, the atmosphere shifted into full emergency protocol. Specialists were called in, procedures were initiated. Every possible effort was being made to slow down what was happening inside his body. But what makes this stage so devastating is how unpredictable it became. One moment there was coordination and controlled urgency. The next, it turned into uncertainty and fear, because even with all the resources available, the response wasn't producing the outcome everyone was hoping for. For his family, this was the moment everything changed from confusion to reality. The situation was no longer about waiting for updates or hoping for recovery. It had become a fight for life. And in cases like this, time is everything. Every passing minute mattered. Every decision mattered. Every second carried weight. But despite the efforts being made inside that hospital, the condition continued to overwhelm the system. And slowly, the racing world, still unaware of the full picture, was about to learn that something far more serious had unfolded than anyone had imagined. Then came the moment nobody in the racing world was prepared for. News began to break across multiple outlets at once, quiet at first, then rapidly spreading. At the center of it all was a single devastating confirmation. Kyle Busch had passed away. No build-up could have truly prepared fans for that sentence. Because just days earlier, he was still part of the active racing world. Still competing, still visible, still Kyle Busch, and now he was gone. The official statements from NASCAR and his team carried a tone of shock and disbelief. Words like devastated and sudden loss appeared, but none of them felt strong enough to capture what the sport was actually feeling in that moment. Across social media, the reaction was instant. Fans refused to believe it at first. Drivers paused. Teams went silent. The garage areas that usually echoed with noise, preparation, and energy suddenly felt heavy. Because this wasn't just the loss of a driver, it was the loss of a presence that had defined an entire generation of NASCAR racing. For his family, the announcement marked the end of a nightmare they had been living privately. For fans, it marked the beginning of a reality they were still struggling to accept. And in that moment, one question spread faster than anything else. How did it happen this quickly? After the initial shock settled, the next thing everyone wanted was answers, because when a figure like Kyle Busch dies suddenly, especially while still active in the sport, the biggest question isn't just what happened, but how did it happen so fast? As more details began to surface through reports and medical explanations, a clearer picture started to form. According to the information shared, the situation escalated due to a severe medical infection that rapidly overwhelmed the body. What made it so dangerous wasn't just the illness itself, but how quickly it progressed. Doctors reportedly identified a chain reaction inside the body that can sometimes happen without much warning. What may start as a common infection can, in rare and severe cases, spiral into something far more critical in a very short time. And that's what made this case so shocking, because from the outside, Kyle Busch was still racing, still active, still appearing normal. But internally, the situation had reportedly already become far more serious than anyone realized. By the time the emergency unfolded, the condition had already reached a critical stage where medical teams were fighting against time. And even with rapid response and immediate hospital care, the progression was too aggressive to fully control. This is the part that leaves fans stunned. Not just that it happened, but that it happened so fast, without clear warning signs that anyone outside could see. In the end, the official explanation gave closure to the mystery, but it also deepened the emotional weight of the story, because it reminded everyone of something uncomfortable but real. Even the strongest athletes aren't immune to sudden, silent medical crises that can change everything in a matter of hours. Kyle Busch's story doesn't end with the tragedy. It expands into something much bigger when you look at what he left behind. Because before everything changed, he wasn't just a driver competing in NASCAR. He was one of the most dominant forces the sport had ever seen. Over his career, Kyle Busch built a legacy that very few can even come close to matching. Championships, record-breaking wins across multiple series, and a reputation for racing with a level of intensity that separated him from almost everyone on the track. He wasn't just fast, he was relentless. The kind of driver who could take a damaged car and still fight his way back to the front. The kind of competitor who turned every race into a battle, no matter the odds. But his impact wasn't only about numbers. Kyle Busch was one of the most polarizing figures in modern racing. Fans either loved him or hated him, but nobody ignored him, and that's what made him unforgettable. Every time he entered a race, he brought energy, tension, and unpredictability. Rival drivers respected him even when they clashed with him. Because deep down, everyone knew racing against Kyle meant you were facing someone who never backed down. And beyond the track, his influence quietly shaped the next generation of drivers. Many rising racers looked up to him, learned from him, or were directly mentored by him at different stages of their careers. That's why his loss hits so deeply across the entire sport, because it's not just about a driver being gone, it's about the end of an era defined by aggression, talent, and pure competitive fire. His records will remain in the history books, but his presence, the energy he brought every time he strapped into a car, is what fans will remember most. And now, the sport is left with a question it can never truly answer. Who replaces someone like Kyle Busch? In the end, what remains is not just the story of a racing driver, but the story of a man who lived at full speed in every sense of the word. Kyle Busch leaves behind more than trophies, championships, and records. He leaves behind a family trying to process an unimaginable loss, a sport that feels slightly emptier without his presence, and millions of fans who watched him define an entire generation of NASCAR racing. For his wife, children, and loved ones, this is a personal tragedy that goes far beyond racing. For the racing world, it is the end of a chapter that helped shape modern NASCAR into what it is today, because Kyle Busch was never just another name on a leaderboard. He was energy, controversy, brilliance, frustration, and greatness all at once. The kind of driver who made every race unpredictable the moment he showed up. And that's why this loss feels so heavy, not just because of what happened, but because of everything he represented while he was here. As the sport moves forward, his records will remain untouched for years. His moments on track will be replayed, analyzed, and remembered. But what fans will miss most is something that can't be recorded in statistics: the presence, the intensity, the feeling that anything could happen when Kyle Busch was in the race. And now, all that remains is memory, a reminder that even the greatest eras eventually come to an end, sometimes without warning.